Having to move into a new house made Guy sad, but not in the ways that you would expect. It wasn't that he liked the old place better. The family of four used to live in a cramped three-bedroom apartment, and the place they were moving into was a whole two-story house, four if you count the attic and basement. It wasn't that he was upset about leaving his old school or friends, they'd moved to a different street in the same neighborhood. It wasn't even that he just didn't like change in the first place, the house was already familiar to him. But he guessed that was the problem. Guy grunted as he carried a box full of all his stuff through the front door. He walked a few paces in and then off to the side to make way for the rest of the movers, and then set the box down. Man, that's heavy, he said, rubbing the slight cramp in his back. Hey, kid. Guy looked up to see that one of the movers was addressing him. Know where I'm supposed to put this? He asked. Didn't the purple one tell you? Guy asked, raising an eyebrow. The mover suddenly seemed rather sheepish. I wasn't really paying attention. Guy snorted. Fair enough. He leaned over the box in the man's hands and took a quick look inside. That looks like mostly photo albums and Mom's old pottery. Just stick it in the attic. Take those and keep walking till you hit Dust Central. The mover quickly thanked him and got to work, not noticing the way the boy's finger had not dropped from where he was pointing it. On the wall of the first platform for the staircase sat a painting. A portrait of a woman with short pink hair and the warmest smile resting gently on her face. He only broke eye contact with the picture when another mover's voice spoke up. Nice place, one of them said, regarding the tall ceilings and polished wood floors. Thanks, Guy said. We inherited it from our Aunt Agnes. And that was why Guy didn't like it there. He'd been to this house many times before when he was little. He and his sister would spend nights sleeping over at their Aunt Agnes's while Mom and Dad were busy. The cotton candy-haired woman would hug them and sing for them and paint with them and chase them through the house. She would play superheroes with them, and they always got to be a team, fighting imaginary foes as a unit. Her laughter would fill the air. Her presence would warm every room she walked into. The whole world had begun feeling rather cold since she died. Guy felt his eyes burning and he frowned. Oh, hell no. He was not about to cry. He didn't even cry at her funeral, a fact that greatly angered his sister, but he took much pride in. He was not about to cry from looking at her portrait. Boys don't cry, even when they're terribly heartbroken, even when they're moving into their dead aunt's house to be reminded of her at every waking moment, even when they really want to. But of course, Guy would never admit any of this, the sadness or the painful memories, or even that the house or her death bothered him at all. And any grief he may have felt was certainly not something he would be able to see just by looking at him. Especially not when he pulled the kind of shit he was about to pull. Guy tore his eyes away from the painting with a smirk. Well, that's enough work for me, he decided, leaning over to rummage through his things. Guy pulled a skateboard out from the bottom of the box, promptly spilling half of its contents onto the floor. He quickly wrestled himself into his pads and clicked on his helmet. He then slammed the skateboard on the ground, jumped on, did a kickflip in the house, and zoomed out the door with one big push. Guy! A voice squeaked indignantly as he flew past. A mover almost lost his balance and toppled over as he passed, but Guy only smiled wider as he rolled away from the house. He let out a ragged breath as he felt himself moving farther and farther away. He felt so viscerally uncomfortable when he was there. It was nice to feel the odd squirming in his guts fade as he rocketed away. It wasn't long before he reached his destination, and the person he was looking for was already out on his front porch, which definitely made Guy's job easier. Hey, Maz! He called. The boy's head shot up, his black shaggy hair shifting as he raised his almond eyes to look at him. Guy stopped with the tail skin and called out again. Want to do a lap around the block? Totally, the boy grinned, shooting to his feet. Maz dashed inside only to emerge seconds later with a skateboard and clicking his helmet into place. He stumbled a bit before rolling his board onto the street and taking off. Race ya, Guy said. You're on, Maz beamed. The sound of wheels against pavement was only matched by the sound of joyous cackling as the boys boarded like maniacs on the empty street. The street in front of Maz's house was always the best to start their races. It was the least busy street in the neighborhood, so the boys had full rein to go crazy. They ollied, they kick-flipped, they weaved between each other, all while cheering and hollering in delight. Check this out, Maz called. The tall teen bent his knees for an ollie and did a 360 in the air. As his wheels hit the floor, he wobbled violently. Whoa! Guy zipped to his side and pulled Maz upright by his hands. Gotcha, he grunted once Maz was towering over him again instead of teetering on the edge of death. The boys smiled at each other before looking back to the path ahead, hands still laced together. Nice one, Guy told him. Thanks. His smile dropped moments later. Oh no. There was a sharp turn up ahead. Guy wasn't too worried about this, as he'd made this turn many times before, if not narrowly, but Maz always seemed to have trouble with it. Guy had a plan, though. Get ready and hold on to your board, dude. Maz bent his knees a bit more in anticipation for whatever Guy was about to do. The shorter teen proceeded to let himself glide in front of his best friend. His eyes narrowed as he focused intently on the stop sign at the end of the turn. Onto the sidewalk, he ordered. They both kick-flipped onto the less even pavement as the turn grew nearer and nearer. Guy stretched one hand in front of him and the other behind him. Maz understood the gesture and held his hand tightly. They had attempted this trick one time before, and it resulted in a sprained wrist and lots of grass stains. But they were nothing if not persistent in their quest for thrills. Just as they were about to pass the stop sign, Guy grabbed its pole. He and Maz cheered as momentum spun them tightly around the corner. The speed in which they were going even lifted them off their feet. Maz managed to keep his grip on his board, but Guy had been using his only free hand to keep a hold of Maz. So as the tall kid's wheels hit the floor, Guy was still in the air with his skateboard rolling away from him. The boy let out a panicked yelp, bracing himself for the impact of his face against the sidewalk. Maz had other plans. Bending as low on the board as he could, Maz steered himself under Guy and caught him bridal style in his arms. Yes! He cheered as he stood back up to his full height and continued rolling down the street. Whoa! Guy chuckled with a big grin and only a slight blush on his face as he wrapped his arms around Maz's neck to keep himself secure. It didn't last too long, though. Guy's weight threw off Maz's center of balance, so they only rolled a few more feet before Maz had to stumble off the board to keep them from crashing. Even so, Maz still fell forward and Guy's butt hit the ground with his best friend's arms still under his back and knees. The boys cackled maniacally. Yes! Guy shouted, pumping his fist in the air. We made it! Now we just gotta figure out how to get me to stay on my board, he stated as he stood up and began going to retrieve said board. You'd be able to make it just fine if you let me do it alone and focused on getting yourself around the bend, Maz stated, straightening his beanie. Never, Guy smirked, spotting his board and walking over to pick it up. Besides, it doesn't count if we don't both make the turn. He kneeled down to pick it up when a black combat boot slammed down on it. Ah! Guy yelped and jumped back, landing once again on his butt. He looked up at the owner of the boot in shock and winced. Black hair that faded into purple at the ends framed the face of a teenage girl that looked almost exactly like him. Guy Hamden, she growled, glaring down at him. Shoot, he hadn't realized how quick they'd circle back to the house. The old apartment was much further away from Maz's house than the new place was. Well, at least it was cool that they lived in the same block now. What was less cool was the death glare his twin sister was giving him. What's up? He smirked at her. You, she stated. In T-minus 2 seconds or I will end you. She kicked his skateboard at him, causing it to bounce off his forearm and into his lap. Hey, he protested, gripping the board as he got to his feet. You break that and you're buying me another one. The girl wasn't listening to him. I distinctly remember Mom and Dad telling us we were both in charge of getting all of our stuff unloaded while they're at work, she snapped. I was gone for 15 minutes, Kel. Don't blow a gasket. Yeah, and you were being so helpful before then. Unloading a single box and not even getting it to your room totally earns you running off to go ride death traps in the street with your best friend, she said, narrowing her underlined eyes. All right, Guy exclaimed, throwing his hands up in surrender. Fine, you win. I'll help you do the girly unpacking. Happy? She was not happy, but she said nothing more and walked away. Guy stuck his tongue out at the back of her head as she retreated back to the moving van to give out the last of her orders to the movers. He turned back to Maz. Catch you later, dude. I can help, Maz offered, shrugging off his helmet. Thanks, but I think we have it covered. I don't mind. I mean, an extra set of hands never hurts, right? Maz, Guy said, sternly. I appreciate it. I really do. But I'm kinda trying to protect you right now. Trust me, you don't want to be around us today. Maz frowned in confusion, but didn't press any further. Hop to it, Guy, Kelly told her brother as she led him through the front door. We also need to organize the basement. Guy grunted as the earlier discomfort returned. the weird pulling sensation in his guts that just would not go away whenever he was in that damned house. And that got strangely stronger for the briefest of moments when Kelly mentioned the basement. "Come on, Kelly, we've gone through everything we've ever owned," Guy complained as he gestured to the handwritten clipboard in Kelly's hands. "Can't we just leave the rest for later?" The girl in the purple sweater vest only narrowed her eyes at him as she threw open the door to the basement. It took every ounce of resolve Guy had to not full-body shiver as the squirming inside him amplified. What the heck is up with me today? He wondered to himself. "No," Kelly insisted. "Mom gave us a job and we are going to finish it. What are you even scared of?" Guy's cheeks reddened as he scowled at her. "I'm not scared," he insisted through clenched teeth. "I'm tired. We went through the whole house. I don't understand why we have to do the basement too." "And I don't understand what you're making such a big stink about," Kelly said, already beginning her descent down the stairs. "You used to love it down here when we were little." Maybe it was because her back was turned to him so he felt less pressure to conceal it, but Guy flinched pretty hard when she said that. Or, more specifically, how she said it. There was no nostalgia or gentle reminder or even teasing in her voice when she said that. Just contempt. Malice. It was almost accusatory in a way. It was almost like she said it specifically to hurt him. Things had been rocky between them since Aunt Agnes's funeral. Guy and Kelly had never been particularly close. They didn't really blame each other for it. They were just very different people. Kelly was organized, sharp, clean, and controlling. Guy was a messy, loud, laid-back, and go-with-the-flow kind of guy. Their appearances expressed this pretty well, what with Kelly's clean ponytail, crisp-collared shirt, pressed skirt, and white stockings. Guy, on the other hand, was generally always decked out in a blue and white hoodie, light beige cargo pants, and scuffed blue sneakers with his short spiky hair all over the place. Even their faces followed this trend. They looked relatively similar despite being fraternal twins, but even so, the differences were clear. Guy's slightly rounder jaw and Kelly's fuller cheeks and more square head, Kelly's pointier nose and Guy's semi-permanent smirk. But despite all this, the two had always managed to find common ground in one thing. Their Aunt Agnes. They both adored that woman, and hanging out with her was one of the only times they managed to work together without butting heads. So it was kind of to be expected that the woman's death would cause such a rift between them. Even so, Guy didn't expect things to change so much between him and his twin. He expected the heartbreak and the drama and the rearranging of their lives during mourning, but it completely baffled him the way Kelly had been acting lately. They had a fight when they got back from the funeral. Apparently, Kelly was mad at him because he hadn't cried at all since finding out about their aunt's passing. He found this genuinely ridiculous and told her as such, which only served to fan the flames of their fight. But Guy didn't care to try and do damage control. Dad didn't cry either. It was just a Guy thing. She wouldn't understand. She didn't understand how hard it had been to keep it together. After all, she was allowed to cry. Guy scowled as he stared at the stairs his sister had disappeared down. She'd yell at him again if he bailed. And as much as he didn't want to deal with her, he couldn't deal with that any better. Guy clenched his jaw and descended down the stairs. It was even worse down there. Guy's face was wrenched into a permanent grimace as he rummaged through the boxes of Aunt Agnes's old stuff. His stomach actually physically hurt being down there, but he couldn't exactly use that as an excuse to get out of work. He couldn't even conceive of the idea that Kelly would let him off the hook because he said he had a bellyache. The thought alone was almost funny enough to make him smile briefly. And so, he instead opted to simply get the work done as quickly as possible. He set a pink lamp down roughly and it toppled over. "Careful, Guy," Kelly insisted. "That's Aunt Agnes's lamp." He pulled out a stack of plates and they clinked together loudly when he dropped them a small distance to the floor. "That's Aunt Agnes's good china," she said, marching over to put a stop to his rough handling of the fragile objects. Guy pulled out a small black jar with a sealed lid and raised an eyebrow at it. "That's Aunt Agnes!" Guy's eyes went wide and he dropped the urn back into the box. "What the fuck?" he said, staring at the thing in horror. "Why'd they just shove her in there next to some fucking plates?" "Careful!" Kelly shouted at him. She reached into the box and gently took the urn into her hands. She stared at it in silence for a moment before turning her gaze back to her twin to glare at him. "What's the look for, Guy?" she snarled, walking away to place the jar on the shelf. I thought boys were too tough to care about when their loved ones die. Guy's teeth ground together so fiercely they sounded like nails on a chalkboard. Just because I didn't cry like a baby at her funeral doesn't mean I didn't care about her, he muttered as he continued to bat around the box. Kelly scoffed as she adjusted the urn's placement on the shelf. Could have fooled me. Kelly cried in pain as a pink plastic water bottle bounced off the back of her head. She clutched the sore spot on her cranium as she turned to glare at the person who had thrown it at her with all his might. Guy was glaring at her fiercely while still crouched next to the box. Their faces turned red in unison. "What's your problem?" they screamed at each other. The twins lunged, and the following scene was not pretty. The first thing Guy did as they collided was grab a fistful of her hair and tug. Not too hard, mind you. He was angry, but he wasn't looking to actually hurt her. He seemed to have failed in this endeavor, however, as Kelly shrieked in pain and punched him square in the face, causing him to stagger back a bit. Guy screamed too and brought a hand to his forehead where her fist had left a red mark on his skull. Kelly then proceeded to start beating on him with her fists, which she blocked mostly with one arm. She wasn't trying to do any real damage either, but seemed to be holding back less. Guy grunted in frustration and pushed her away with a bit more force than he meant to, as Kelly went flying and stumbled backwards into the wall with a thud. Guy's jaw dropped as he heard a faint crack. Holy shit, I just killed my sister, he thought in horror. Thankfully, Kelly was back on her feet and glaring at him in no time, soothing his fears of having two dead relatives to deal with. Guy's shoulders sagged in relief just as Kelly winded up to tackle him again. But before he could regain his fighting mentality, something caught his eye over Kelly's shoulder. His brows furrowed in confusion as his head tilted to the side. The action seemed to quell Kelly's anger long enough to be curious about what he was looking at, and she glanced behind her as well. The two of them stared in awe at what they had just uncovered. Behind the metal panel on the wall that Kelly had rammed into was a small, square cubby containing just one item. A smooth, pink ring made of some sort of stone with a white S carved into it. Guy's insides screamed. His torso felt like it was full of a bunch of bees on crack, and yet he moved closer, standing just behind Kelly as she gasped in realization. Guy, she practically whispered, picking the ring up from its white pedestal. Do you know what this is? Guy vaguely recognized the ring. He'd seen it on Aunt Agnes's finger once or twice. It was his understanding that she never took it off, despite not being married, so it couldn't be a wedding ring, and yet no one ever seemed to notice it that much. The colors and specific way the S symbol was shaped was familiar in another way, though. Aunt Agnes's tacky ring that she keeps hidden in the wall, he guessed, trying to sound nonchalant as he stared at it with confusion and longing. Yes! Kelly beamed, breaking into an impossibly wide smile. And do you know what that makes her? Crazy? It makes her SheZow, she said, getting right up in his face and causing him to flinch backwards. Oh yeah, that's what he remembered it from. The pink-clad superhero that their dad would complain about non-stop despite her being Megadale's resident protector. Kelly never shut up about her. Guy didn't see what the big whoop was. She was a hero. She helped people. In leopard print tights and a dress. It was cool, he guessed, but a little girly for his tastes. He shouldn't have a single interest in this ring besides confusion about why the heck it was hidden in the wall. And yet, the squirming in his guts was going nuts over it. Remember how I said it felt like a pull? Yeah. Guy had a pretty good idea of what it was pulling him towards. Oh my goddess! Kelly swooned, squeezing her eyes shut in excitement. I have dreamed about being SheZow my whole life! Guy made a quick swipe for the ring while her eyes were closed, but she jerked away at the last moment as she brought it back up to her face to admire. And now I, Kelly Hamden, will carry on our family's super legacy! Guy didn't know what came over him, but he snatched it out of her hands right then and there. Hey! She screeched. The girl lunged for the ring, but Guy pushed her face away with his hand, and that was seemingly enough to keep her at bay. Family super legacy? Are you hearing yourself, Kelly? Guy asked, genuinely baffled by how goofy his no-nonsense sister was acting as she made grabby arms at the ring. Aunt Agnes was not SheZow. She yelped as he shoved her away with enough force to send her back a few steps. Did SheZow even wear a ring? I thought she wore gloves, he chuckled to himself as he fiddled with the ring for a moment. And then for some reason decided to put it on. Kelly's eyes widened as the pink ring descended on his right index finger in slow motion. Guy, don't! She was too late. He slipped it on and the squirming stopped. There was a small glow emanating off the ring now that he barely noticed because the squirming stopped. Wow. It was so quiet he wasn't even sure if he mumbled it out loud or just thought it in his head. A different sound grabbed his attention soon after. Guy? Kelly practically whispered. Interestingly enough, she wasn't staring at him with murder in her eyes. Instead, they were wide and somewhat fearful. What did you do? Guy raised an unimpressed eyebrow at her theatrics. Chill out, dude. I don't have cooties. Kelly stared at the ring as it glowed brighter. Guy? Seriously, Cal, I'll give it back. I'm just messing with you a little, he chuckled. But seriously? SheZow? You think our sweet old aunt that let us tie her satin pillowcases around our necks to play superheroes was out there punching villains in the face as a side gig? He demonstrated the absurdity by throwing a few punches at nothing, and as he did so, patches of his arms began to glow, primarily around the ring, as light crawled up his arms like burning paper, revealing white, fingerless gloves. Guy, Kelly said again, her jaw almost hitting the floor at what was happening in front of her. Don't get me wrong, she totally could kick any villain's ass any day of the week, but she wouldn't because she'd be too busy baking them brownies and asking them what was wrong. Guy genuinely smiled at the thought, completely oblivious to the fact that he was steadily getting taller as white go-go boots formed on his feet. He put on a sloppy mimicry of Aunt Agnes's voice. I'm SheZow, and I'm here to kick ass while looking cute and being generally fabulous. He laughed as the glowing replaced his cargos and hoodie with a pink dress. What was her catchphrase again? Oh yeah. He jumped into the air while the glowing encased his entire body. You go, girl! And just like that, it was done. Before Kelly stood her brother, but he was almost unrecognizable. White boots and gloves, a pink halter-neck quarter-length dress with a white belt around the waist and a white S in the center of the chest, and dark pink leggings underneath. A scarf-like cape was wrapped around his neck, as were locks of long black hair with a gradient streak of pink on the right side of his head, and similar eyeshadow to match. The pink ring matched his dress and still sat on his right index finger. Guy was SheZow. Kelly burst into laughter. In fact, calling it laughter might even be an understatement. She full-on cackled. Guy was a bit baffled that this was her reaction to him mocking her favorite superhero, but he supposed it was better than getting punched in the gut. He chuckled along with her. Pretty good, huh? I'll let you be the judge, Kelly said, still cackling as she grabbed him by the shoulders and dragged him over to a mirror. Guy was getting more baffled by the second, so he allowed her to steer him wherever she wanted him to go. And when he was placed in front of the full-length mirror, reality shattered to pieces around him. What the fuck? He yelled. His crass words and the voice in which he spoke them were a stark contrast to his current visage, but he didn't seem to care. Guy frantically tugged at the bottom of his skirt, as if testing to see if it were real while simultaneously trying to tear it off. What happened? The ring turned you into SheZow, Kelly told him, walking over to a box and pulling out a comic book. She turned the cover to face him. A woman wearing similar, though not identical, attire to him was showcased on the cover, punching a robber in the face. There were quite a few differences, actually. The leopard print was probably the easiest to point out. It seemed she was wearing a pink U-neck bodysuit in the wild pattern with a super high-waisted dark pink skirt over top. There was a white stripe that separated the skirt from the bodysuit that perfectly matched her boots, which were identical to Guy's. It was also long-sleeved and she wore dark pink gloves instead of white. Her belt was also very different. It was black and sharper than his, with a white S in the middle of it. Her hair, though very similar, was quite a bit more voluminous. But even despite all this, it was easy to see the resemblance. The title read in large letters, SheZow. I am not SheZow, Guy insisted, pulling at his collar, trying desperately to tear the dress off. When he was unsuccessful with that, he tried to peel off one of his gloves, but found no luck there either. I'm a guy! Well, now Guy looks like a lady, Kelly smirked. Guy stopped trying to force off the suit and glared at her. Here, he said, gripping the ring on his finger. You can have the stupid ring back. He tried to pull it off, but it wouldn't budge. Staring at the ring in shock, he tried again, hunching over to get better leverage. When that didn't work, he gripped the pink stone with his teeth and pulled. But to no avail. It's stuck! Help me get it off! Kelly looked at him in a combination of boredom and anger, with her arms crossed as Guy stuck his hand out to her. "It can't come off," she told him. Guy paused. "Say what?" SheZow legend clearly states, "Whoever shall weareth the ring will forever bear the power and responsibility of SheZow." Guy's face contorted as he heard this. No. This couldn't be happening. No. He couldn't be SheZow. No. What would people say? No. What would his dad think? No! Guy threw his head back and screamed. Shockwaves of sound boomed from his throat as the house quaked around him. Anything made of glass shattered, including the mirror they were both standing in front of. The moment Guy heard the first crack, something forced his eyes open. The uneasy feeling was back. He watched as the mirror shattered and the pieces seemed to lunge out at him. Lunge out at Kelly. Moving faster than he knew was humanly possible, Guy scooped Kelly into his arms and ran to the other side of the room. Though this turned out to be less of a carry and more of a tackle as he rolled his ankle after the third step and they went flying to the floor. Nevertheless, Guy had successfully removed her from the range of the glass projectiles and she seemed relatively unharmed. Guy put a hand over his mouth in shock as he heard his sister groan in confusion. Did I do that? He heard a small gasp. It seemed Kelly had recovered and was looking over her shoulder at the mirror. Guy got off of her and looked back as well. Behind the mirror was a door. A pink steel door with the same S symbol in the center. The twins warily got up, and as they approached, the door hissed and opened up to show what looked like the inside of an elevator. "Shut the front door," Guy mumbled. The two of them stepped out of the elevator into what looked like a large cave with pink gemstones sticking out of the walls. They were strong and shiny and reminded Guy uncomfortably of the material that the magically adhered ring on his finger was made of. But that wasn't all. The floor they stepped out onto was smooth and cold like metal, but with no echo when their shoes clacked against it. The chamber was made of 4 circular platforms made from the substance, the biggest of the bunch being the one they were already on. It did appear to be the main attraction of whatever the fuck this was, and showcased a large control panel that took up nearly a quarter of the diameter of the platform. Kelly was in awe, and the first one to walk into the room. Guy really didn't want to, but he followed not long after. He didn't know for sure what happened back there, but it gave him the impression that when he was like this, he was pretty good at keeping people safe. Guy yelped as he rolled his ankle again and tripped flat on his face. Kelly turned around to scowl at him, but he paid her no mind, instead of opting to tug fruitlessly at his high-heeled boots. "Why would anyone ever wear these? They're horrible," he grunted. Nevertheless, Guy stood back up at Kelly's side, and the two of them jumped at the next thing that occurred. "Afternoon, SheZow." A woman's voice with a slight British accent sounded from behind them. The twins spun around. Sitting in the center of the once empty holographic computer screen was a pair of floating pink lips. "Huh?" Guy squeaked. The pair of lips was smiling when they addressed him, but it quickly frowned. "Wait a minute." A beam of pink light appeared from the red dot on the monitor. Before either of the twins could object, the light washed over Guy in a circular scanning motion. "I see," the lip said. "You're not Agnes Monroe." Guy felt his heart wrench. This computer thing sounded resigned and silently devastated at this discovery. "Holy shit," Guy deflated. He ran a hand through his hair. "And Agnes was SheZow. And you're Sheila!" Kelly exclaimed, her shiny grin back in full force. "SheZow supercomputer! It's an honor to meet you, your digital dynamicness. My name is Kelly Hamden, and I know who you two are." Sheila smiled, a touch of warmth returning to her voice. "I know everything." Kelly squealed in excitement. Guy simply grimaced. "Cool," he said, raising his hand up to show her the ring. "Now can you tell me how the fuck to get this thing off my— Hey!" Guy flinched back and yelped as a mechanical claw holding a pink spray bottle emerged from out of nowhere and sprayed him. "Watch your language, young man," Sheila scolded him. "If you're going to be SheZow, you'll need to learn how to behave more ladylike." "I am not SheZow, and I will not act ladylike, 'cause I'm a boy!" Guy insisted. "Yes, that is an interesting development," Sheila stated, retracting the arm back into her console. "But you're wearing the ring, and it's not going anywhere, so I suppose you better get used to the idea." "I won't!" Guy snapped. "I wasn't even supposed to be SheZow. Kelly was probably meant to get the ring." "Oh yeah, thanks for reminding me," Kelly said. Guy, I'm gonna kill you for this. Yeah, me too, he grunted. You're seriously telling me that the ring binds itself to the first person who puts it on and it's a done deal? What if a burglar broke in while the house was empty and took it? That would be rather inconvenient, wouldn't it? Sheila stated, seemingly unbothered by that hypothetical. Guy growled, and Kelly had to hold him back by his shoulders to stop him from lunging and doing something. Oh, hush, Sheila said, rolling her non-existent eyes. Listen, you. I understand that your rigid ideas of acceptable gender expression and pubescent mindset have left you rather embarrassed by this conundrum, but it simply isn't the main issue as of now. Megadale has been without SheZow for a month, and it's only a matter of time before things get very bad because of it. Then help me get the stupid ring off and give it to someone that actually wants to do this! I don't know how many times I have to explain to you that that's not possible before you get the picture. Kelly merely chuckled, to which Guy spun around and glared at her. Didn't you say this was your dream? Guy snapped. Aren't you mad about this too? I am, Kelly agreed. She smirked evilly. But watching you suffer adequately eases my pain. Before Guy could do anything hasty, Sheila cut in again. Right, this conversation is going nowhere, the supercomputer stated. Listen, Guy, you want to get out of that outfit, yes? Yes, I'm literally begging you, Guy agreed. Wonderful. Being SheZow is not a full-time job, especially when her image is upheld as a warning to villains. So simply agree to inherit your aunt's mantle, and as the city's protector, you'll be able to go about your life relatively normally. All you really have to do is put on the suit and throw down every once in a while. Guy frowned. I won't. Then I won't tell you how to change back. His eyes widened. What? You heard me, Sheila smirked. Until you accept being SheZow, you won't be able to stop being her. Or I suppose him. You can't do that! Guy frantically turned to Kelly. Come on, Kel, you're the biggest SheZow nerd I know. You gotta know how to get me to change back. I do. Yes, what is it? Not telling. Guy's brain crashed. Why? She smirked and shrugged. Sheila's right, Guy. The world needs SheZow. Looks like you're gonna have to suck it up and deal with it. She turned around and started walking back towards the elevator. Hey! Guy said, following her with stumbling steps. Where are you going? I'm gonna go organize the rest of the basement, she explained as she stepped into the elevator. She turned around and looked him up and down. Guess you got to get out of the girly unpacking after all. The metal doors shut and Guy was left standing in a cave under his house dressed as a girl with only a supercomputer for company. This sucks, Guy groaned as he continued to tug at his heels in vain. After a whole 2 minutes of just staring at the elevator door in shock, Guy decided his feet hurt and opted to hunker down on the hot pink sofa on the other side of the platform to Sheila. He then proceeded, once again, to try with all his might to get the high-heeled boots off. How the fuck did Aunt Agnes manage to fight crime in these things? The short answer is lots of practice and having her endurance enhanced by SheZow's powers, Sheila answered. Guy immediately frowned and shot the computer a miffed look. I'm not talking to you, he told her. Ah, yes, and I suppose you expect me to do nothing while you sit there and sulk. I don't really expect anything from you, seeing as you've trapped me down here. Guy grunted as he swung his legs back down to the floor. You are not trapped here. You can leave whenever you please, Sheila demonstrated by opening the elevator door for him, seemingly in anticipation. I'm not going out there dressed like this, and you won't tell me how to change back, so effectively you are trapping me here. Guy glared at her before leaning over to rub his ankle that was still sore from the previous rollings. Not that I'd even be able to walk far enough to get anywhere. Would you like me to teach you how? Sheila offered. Guy lifted his eyes to stare at Sheila. He was uncertain if that was a genuine offer or if she was just teasing him. He was also uncertain of why the hell he was actually considering it. The answer should be no. Absolutely not. Why the hell would he want to be able to walk in these stupid things? Hell no. And yet... Fine, whatever, Guy said, warily standing back up. He was still freaked out by how tall he was in these boots. Don't have anything better to do. And that was how Guy found himself walking up and down the length of Sheila's platform, feeling like both a baby deer and a freak show exhibit. I have to say I'm impressed, Sheila told him. You're actually rather competent in those. Thanks, I guess, he said, slowly allowing himself to not stare intently at his own feet while taking steps. He felt like he should have rejected the compliment, gone red and told her to shut up. and he was blushing a bit, but he didn't feel nearly as embarrassed as he thought he would feel strutting clumsily up and down an imaginary runway in platform heels. Perhaps his ability to feel embarrassed had been overloaded by the events of that day and allowed him to sort of just deal. "Your balance and ankle strength is quite impressive," Sheila stated. "Oh, that makes sense," Guy said, stopping his walking to turn to her for a moment. "Those are like the two key skills you gotta have when skateboarding. I guess my main problem right now is that I'm just not used to having giant wedges on my feet." He popped his hip and stuck one of his legs out to regard the boot. It actually didn't look too bad. The thinness of his leg combined with the chunkiness of the heel was actually rather pleasing to look at. It just sucked that it was stuck to him. "Well, in any case, I'm sure you'll get used to it in time," Sheila said. Guy frowned. "I won't have to, because I'm not being SheZow," he grunted at her. "All right, then," Sheila merely hummed. She didn't seem to be in the mood for another argument, and frankly, neither was he. So instead of attacking her again, Guy just sighed and shoved his hands into the pockets of his dress that he hadn't been aware existed beforehand. "Anywho," he said, looking around at the lair. "While I'm waiting for you to get over yourself, got anything fun to do around here?" A spotlight shone down from the ceiling and illuminated one of the smaller platforms that branched off from the main large one. On it sat a large TV set up with a gaming console and 3 pink beanbag chairs. "Hey, it's Aunt Agnes's gaming stuff," Guy stated, making his way over to the platform with a nostalgic glint in his eye. "I always thought it was so cool how an old lady liked to play this stuff with me and Kelly, even if most of the games she had were way old." He chuckled to himself as he kneeled down to observe one of the discs that were in the box by the base of the TV. He snorted as he picked up one labeled Puzzle Quest. This one came out so long ago the character sprites were all pixelated, but it was still one of our favorites. Guy jumped as the TV turned on seemingly on its own, and Sheila showed up in a small corner of the screen. "Shall I activate multiplayer?" she asked. Guy contemplated her offer for a moment, and then smiled. "You gotta swing over here, Sheila." "I'm trying, but the controls aren't working," she stated. Her little pink sprite simply sat at the end of the rope, completely unmoving, while Guy's blue sprite waited for her on a different floor. "You don't use the joystick to swing. You gotta press triangle and then use the arrow buttons," Guy told her. "What?" Sheila said, sounding slightly offended. Even so, she did as instructed, and her sprite was able to begin swinging. "Why is that the control?" "I don't know, dude. I didn't write the code on this thing," Guy chuckled. Sheila's sprite managed to swing to the other side and landed on the button that allowed Guy's sprite to continue forward. The two of them regrouped and then went through the door to the next level. "How did you not know that? Aren't you in the game right now?" "I am not in the game," Sheila explained. "I'm projecting my image onto the screen so you feel less lonely talking to a disembodied voice. Control-wise, I still have to input the same signals you do." "I meant that you're a supercomputer," Guy clarified. "Couldn't you download all the control functions and find out how to crack all the puzzles in seconds?" "I could, but I figured you'd have a better time if you actually got to teach me to play." Guy's smile faded a bit at her considerateness. Knowing what she wanted from him, it made him uneasy whenever she did something nice. The whole situation felt so surreal. Half an hour ago, he'd been fighting with his sister in the basement. Now he was playing video games in a secret lair with a supercomputer that was effectively blackmailing him into being a superhero. What's more, he was actually beginning to genuinely enjoy her company. Thankfully, before he could think any harder on that troubling topic, his phone rang. Guy jumped, partially at the interruption to his thoughts, and partially at the fact that his phone still existed on this material plane enough to ring. He hadn't thought too hard about where his clothes had gone, but he assumed everything in his pockets had followed them to whatever pocket dimension they'd been sent to. Apparently not. Guy stuck his hands in his dress pockets only to find nothing. He then proceeded to pat around himself, looking for it. "Check the back pouch in your utility belt," Sheila told him. Guy's eyes snapped to her again. "Utility belt?" "Problem?" Sheila asked with a smirk. "So many, dude," Guy groaned. Still, he took her advice and checked the back pocket on his white belt. Lo and behold, there it was. The caller ID got him equally excited and nervous. Maz. "Hey, buddy," Guy greeted as he pressed the phone to his ear. "Hi, Guy," came Maz's chipper reply. "How's unpacking going?" Guy's eyes involuntarily shot around the room, reminding him of his current predicament as to make sure he felt maximum guilt over the bold-faced lie he was about to tell. Pretty boring, Guy said, slouching in his seat as if acting like it was true would make it seem more convincing. Kelly's super strict about how thorough we have to be, so we probably won't be done until nightfall. Ah, Maz hummed, so I guess you won't have any time to hang out. Guy winced at how disappointed he sounded. Yeah, sorry, man, maybe tomorrow, he said. No, I totally get it, Maz insisted. I'd be cool even if you weren't busy. I know you and your family are going through a lot right now. Guy flinched, very hard. His face immediately sunk into an uncomfortable frown. Where'd that come from? He asked, trying not to sound too defensive. You know, just that I get it, Maz said, thankfully not picking up on the tenseness in Guy's voice. I know how close you and your aunt were. I know it must be really hard having to move into her house right after her death, and with the fights you and Kelly keep having. Guy was frozen. He didn't know how he was possibly supposed to respond to that. He did not need his feelings validated in such an uncalled-for manner, especially since he was fine. Me and Kelly fight all the time, Maz. It barely has anything to do with Aunt Agnes, he lied. You sure? Maz asked. Totally, he lied. Kelly's just bossy and doesn't like it when I don't pull my weight. The house is awesome. I don't have any problem moving here. And you're sure you're not just struggling in general with her death? Maz questioned. You don't have to protect me from your feelings. I'm always here if you need me, you know. Guy wanted to crawl under a rock and hide from the sun forever. No. He'd been trying to act fine so Maz wouldn't feel this way. Like he had to coddle him because he couldn't handle it on his own. I'm okay, Maz, he lied. Of course I'm sad about Aunt Agnes, but I'm seriously fine. Guy was sweating now. He messed that up. He messed that up bad. That sounded about as convincing as if he'd just started sobbing right then and there. Okay, but sorry, dude, Kelly's calling. Talk to you later. He hung up without another word. He then proceeded to pinch the bridge of his nose with all his might, because that was so bad, and Maz was going to be worrying over nothing for the rest of the day. Ah, Sheila hummed, dragging Guy out of his thoughts. So that's why. What? Guy responded with a quirked eyebrow. Why did you lie to that sweet boy, Guy? Because who in their right mind would tell their best friend that they're stuck in a cave under their house dressed as a female superhero? I was not referring to SheZow. Guy froze, tensing pretty much every muscle in his body. I didn't. Really? Yes, really, Guy snapped. I'm fine. Just because Mom and Kelly fell apart over this doesn't mean I will. In fact, it means that I can't. I have to be strong for them. Sheila didn't respond right away. She seemed to be observing him, despite her lack of eyes. She broke into a soft smile. You're an incredibly brave young man. Guy flinched at the abruptness of this compliment. He wasn't able to regain his voice before Sheila continued. You're kind, you're brave, and you have a deep need to protect others even from yourself. She trailed off for a moment, her smile fading. You seem frightened of your own feelings. You don't allow yourself to have them, and if they come along and you deem them inappropriate, you squash them down and bury them with poor decisions and vaguely clever jokes. I found it peculiar that someone so desperate to not be wearing a pink dress would refuse to take the necessary steps to have it removed, even if it did mean they'd have to put it back on every now and then. At first I thought you were just stubborn, but it's clear to me now. You don't think you can handle filling your aunt's boots, so you're delaying the inevitable as long as you can. Okay, Guy said, leaning back in his chair with the deepest grimace Sheila had ever seen on his face. That's all deeply personal and a little preachy, don't you think? I think that you will make quite an adequate SheZow. I think you will enjoy being able to help and protect people. And I think being SheZow will be good for you. Guy didn't know what to say. It would be easy to just brush her off and lash out, but how could he after she read him so easily? How could he after she'd shown so much faith in him, despite him having the ring being a mistake? He didn't have any more time to contemplate her words before the wriggling feeling exploded in his guts again. Guy hissed and clutched his abdomen. At the same time, Sheila disappeared from the game TV and pink lights began flashing all throughout the lair. "She-emergency," Sheila's voice rang out. Guy jogged over to the main platform to look at her in confusion. "What's going on?" he asked her. An image appeared on her monitor showcasing a gaggle of adults dressed as pirates that were pointing weapons and breaking into stores. "The pushy pirate posse is causing a ruckus at the downtown square," Sheila told him. "Who?" Guy asked. "A gaggle of pirate-themed crooks that specialize in robbery." Guy deadpanned at that description. "Wow, no one in the super biz is cool, are they?" "No," Sheila stated, "but they are dangerous. Police reports say that a few of them have even taken hostages in a jewelry shop." Guy's eyes widened. "Hostages?" 10 in total," Sheila confirmed. "Well then, while the pushy pirates are busy at work plundering booty, have you decided if you're ready to kick some?" Guy thought about it. He thought about it really hard. As he stared at the floor, he caught sight of his reflection in the polished surface. "No. Guy, no," he said, glaring at the supercomputer. There was a loud hissing behind him. Guy turned around just in time to see a hole in the center of the lair open up and a pink and white race car was raised into place. "Okay." Just like that, Guy was driving a car through an underground tunnel leading to who knows where. His only choice was to trust that Sheila knew what she was doing and would be able to lead him through the city. "Guy?" He managed to keep the steering wheel steady, but he'd be lying if he said that didn't startle him. He looked down at the small screen on the car where an image of Kelly back in the lair was shown. She didn't look happy. "I came down to bring you some lunch. Want to explain what the heck you're doing?" "You said the world needed SheZow," he snapped back, defensively. "So here I go! SheZowing!" "What the fuck am I doing?" "Well, for one, you're driving," Kelly expressed in horror when she recognized why his hair was blowing like that. "Since when can you drive?" "He can't," Sheila's voice cut in. The screen split in two so he could see both of them at the same time. "But SheZow can. And as for what you're doing, you're about to breach the tunnel, so get ready. I'm sending you the address so your She-PS can guide you." True to her words, the walls seemed to open up and suddenly he was on the street next to actual cars. Guy started to get nervous at this. What if he accidentally hit someone? But he seemed to be faring pretty well as he took a right as per the She-PS's instructions. "Okay, so he can drive," Kelly said, clearly still nervous. "But what about the fact that you're sending him in to fight armed robbers? He hasn't practiced his powers. He probably doesn't even know what powers SheZow has." "Super strength and super speed are the main physical ones, I think," Guy began muttering to himself. "I think it can sense danger, too. I remember SheZow having a sword made of pink light. Oh, and the screaming thing. I did that back at the house." Guy took his eyes off the road for a millisecond to glance at the screen. Kelly was staring at him with her mouth agape. Guy flushed his pink as his eyeshadow. "You never shut up about her, Kel. Of course I remember a thing or two." "Besides," Sheila said, "there's no time for him to mess around beforehand. Pushy pirates are unpredictable. We can't just leave them armed with 10 hostages." "When you say armed, do you mean stupid swords or guns? They have pistols." Guy gulped. "She-rific." "Guy, turn around. It's too much. You're not ready," Kelly ordered. "He can handle it, Kelly," Sheila told her. "He's coming up on the jewelry shop in a few blocks." "And then what do I do? If I go in there guns a-blazing, their guns are going to start blazing and someone's going to die," Guy said. "Use the vanishing cream." "The what?" "It'll turn you invisible. Third pocket on your left. Looks like blemish cream." "Why?" "Hush up and get to it. You're there." Guy instinctively pulled over to the side of the road and parked. He looked around with wide eyes. Criminals were everywhere. Thankfully enough, so were the police, but that only heightened his nerves because lots of them were getting their butts handed to them. They were holding their own all right, but they weren't winning. Well, one guy was. A black-haired beefy cop had found his gun out of his reach, and instead of falling back, he opted to rush forward and deck the peg-legged criminal in the face. This action gave Guy a better view of his face. "Dad!" Guy beamed. "Get him, Boxter! Right swing! Give him the old 1-2, Sheila cheered. Officer Hamden sidestepped and ducked under another swing from the pirate's sword. He then shifted around and knocked him down. Guy restrained himself from cheering for 2 reasons. One, he didn't want to risk the man recognizing his voice. And two, there was a second pirate lunging at him from behind. Guy panicked and reached into his belt for the first thing he could find, which turned out to be a hairbrush. Whatever. As long as he could throw it with enough force to throw the pirate off her trajectory. He jumped up onto the side door of the car, somehow miraculously managing to balance enough in his crouched position to throw the brush with all his might. As the shiny pink brush flew through the air, it changed into some sort of S-shaped blade. Suddenly it was flying much faster and hit the crook so hard she was sent flying into another pirate. They were both knocked out. Then the blade started turning back around and came towards him again. Guy yelped and raised his hand just in time to catch it, but the impact still knocked him backwards into the car. For a second, he sat sprawled out on the seat in awe. "Whoa," he said, grinning like a doofus. Then, feeling rather cool, he rolled back onto his hands and pushed with all his might. He sent himself flying out of the car and onto his platform heels with ease. Guy brought his fists up, fully intending to deck the next pirate he saw, but a familiar voice stopped that plan in its tracks. "Ah, look," he heard an exasperated groan. "SheZow's back to steal all the glory again." Guy flinched and looked over to see that his father was glaring directly at him. "Oh, right," Guy thought, suddenly much less sure of himself. "Dad hates SheZow." He didn't feel as strong as he did a moment ago. In fact, he didn't feel like a superhero at all. He felt like a boy in a dress and makeup. Makeup that he really hoped altered his face enough that his dad wouldn't recognize him. Better yet, he just wanted to be invisible. And so that he became. Guy reached into the instructed pouch in his belt and pulled out what looked like a pink tube of toothpaste. Unsure of exactly what he was meant to do with it, Guy simply ripped the cap off and squirted it over his head. Much more came out than he was expecting. So much so that his entire body was covered in seconds. And when it washed off and faded into the floor, he was gone. Guy flexed his invisible fingers in surprise at how well it worked. He couldn't see himself at all. It left him a tad disoriented, but he would make do. Shoving the cream, which hadn't turned invisible with the rest of him, back into his belt, Guy located the jewelry store and got to work. He jogged over to the glass doors and hesitated before opening them. If I'm doing the stealth mode, shouldn't I be a bit more stealthy? Instead of going in right away, Guy peered inside. There were about 5 pirates and 7 hostages, though Sheila said there were 10, so there were probably more. All of the robbers were armed with both pistols and curved swords. Things seemed to be stable at least. No one was being threatened and no one was dead. But Guy still had no idea how he was going to do this. He already decided going through the doors was a no. Could he smash a window? That would cause even more of a scene. Actually, maybe he should cause a scene. He was invisible right now, so if he moved quick enough, he wouldn't give away his location, and they'd all bring their fire away from the hostages. Ugh, why did planning have to be so hard? Guy heard a yelp. A man had been pushed to the ground, and he was leaning over a little boy. They both looked terrified. Me said no sudden movements, scallywag, a muscly pirate in a red and white shirt said. There was a horrible smirk on the pirate's face as he pointed his pistol at the man's head. Suddenly, planning didn't matter anymore. Guy zoomed through the doors, damn near blowing them off their hinges as he raced towards the crook. He was moving so fast that by the time he reached him, the robber was only just starting to react to the fact that the doors had been opened by nothing. The first thing Guy did was grab the gun and point it away from the man and child. Then he twisted it to loosen the man's grip. Then he palm-striked the man in the chest and sent him flying into the wall on the other side of the room, where he slumped down. Unconscious. I'm fast. Guy gaped at his own ability for only a moment before taking the gun in his hand and throwing it on the ground. It shattered to pieces on impact. I'm strong, too. By this point, everyone in the room was panicking. The pirates were confused. The hostages were super confused. One pirate tried to take aim and fire at him, but the squirming in his guts alerted Guy to the oncoming attack before the sound of the gun going off did, and he dodged with ease. He then spun around and lunged at the man who fired, uppercutting him, grabbing the gun, crushing it, and then throwing the unconscious man's body at another criminal who toppled over with a yelp. Not out, but immobilized for now. Guy turned to the last 2 crooks who had forgoed their guns and instead opted to rush in his general direction and make wide swings. Guy managed to dodge rather competently, seeing as they couldn't see him. He reached into his belt for something that might help him disarm them and pulled out what felt like a small tube with a little button on it. He pressed the button and felt a large, hot presence burst out of the top. He took a swing of faith, and as he did, the vanishing cream wore off. The entire store, minus the sleeping pirates, bore witness to him slicing the swords in half with a saber made of hot pink light. He then spun around and spin-kicked them into the wall with the other slumped-over criminal. The room fell silent, and then burst into applause. Guy jumped. He had forgotten they could see him now and blushed deeply. He was soon crowded by thankful adults who were all weeping and shaking his hand. After a moment of just being gobsmacked, Guy allowed himself to smile, before it was immediately wiped off his face. The squirming inside him lurched again, and forced him to look in the direction of the second-floor stairs, where the last pirate was dragging the boy from earlier upstairs by the arm. "Daddy!" the kid cried as he disappeared around the corner. The man from earlier spun around in horror. "Jose!" Guy immediately started shoving through the adults as he zoomed to the stairs and ran up one flight, but his ankles both rolled at the same time as he tried to scale the second. Shoot! He should have practiced more. Now was not the time, Heels! He quickly scrambled up the last flight of stairs, and followed the trail of knocked-over jewelry to find the last robber had shattered a window, and was currently holding the boy outside of it by his ankles. "Any closer and I drop him!" the gold-toothed pirate yelled. Guy froze in his tracks. The boy, Jose, was looking at him with tears in his big brown eyes. Guy wanted to tell him it would all be okay. He wanted to tell him not to worry, but all his attention was on the pirate. "I've got one simple demand, SheZow," the robber growled. "Let me and me crew go and nobody gets hurt." It was a terrible ultimatum. The moment Guy got that boy to safety, it was over. Was he going to hold that boy out of the window the entire time it took for his crew to wake up and escape? And that was if the police hadn't already arrested them. And then, was he going to just sacrifice himself? He didn't really seem like that kind of guy. None of that mattered, though. The threat was still real. Jose was still in grave danger. Maybe he was fast enough. Maybe he could grab the boy and push the pirate away like he had with the gun. He tried to. But the moment he even twitched forward, the pirate dropped him. Guy rushed forward and grabbed Jose by his shirt. The boy screamed as he dangled over the pavement below. It was the only thing stopping Guy from letting go as broken glass dug into his armpit. Then the pirate hit him with his sword. Like the glass, it somehow didn't puncture any skin, but his grip slipped. Jose screamed as he began to fall. Guy screamed too. He turned his face to the pirate and wailed, blowing the crook through the wall, and then he jumped after Jose. There was a split second while he was free-falling where Guy deeply regretted his decision to vault himself out a window after a falling child, but that regret quickly vaporized as he managed to gather Jose in his arms and turn them mid-air so his back would shield the kid from the impact of the floor. Guy squeezed his eyes shut and hoped beyond hope that he was, 1, strong enough to survive this fall, and 2, soft enough to break Jose's fall. That hope lasted for 2 seconds, and then his back slammed against the pavement. The pain that shot through his body was gone after only a moment. When he opened his eyes, the world was blurry, and gravity felt weird. His ears were ringing, but it soon cleared as he heard Jose's ragged breathing. Guy, very slowly and very carefully, wrapped his arms around the boy again, to feel for any sign of injury. When the boy did nothing besides snuggle deeper into his body, he slowly lifted them both up into a sitting position, keeping one arm around the boy's back and head. Once they were sitting with the boy in his lap, Jose gently lifted his head to look at him, and then started sobbing. Guy flinched as tears and snot poured violently out of the boy's orifices. Guy merely sat there as a little boy bawled his eyes out on his lap. He thought frantically about what to do about this. Several phrases appeared in his mind. "It's okay. Come on, buddy. You're fine, see? Be brave. Don't cry." These were phrases he heard when he was little and upset, primarily from his father. They all seemed effective enough, except when he heard them, they were always followed by another phrase. "Boys don't cry." Of course they did. Of course boys cried when they were just thrown out a window. Anyone would. So he didn't say anything. He just hugged him. He wrapped his arms around the tiny, sobbing boy and allowed him to rub snot and tears into his cape. Then he slowly got up and started walking back around to the front of the store. The boy's father was weeping too, When Guy came to the front of the store again, the man was being consoled by a police officer, but she wasn't lessening his hysteria. Guy, not knowing what else to do to alert him to his presence, cleared his throat, and then immediately winced. That didn't sound like a girl cough. Not even remotely. It still did its job, though. The man looked up to see Guy cradling his sobbing but otherwise unharmed son in his arms. The man cried out in relief and gladly took his son from him. He ran his hands through the boy's curly black hair and kissed his little forehead 5 times. The boy didn't seem to mind his father's prickly beard against his brown skin. Not one bit. Guy jumped as the man put a hand on his shoulder. "Thank you," he wheezed, his voice cracking. "Thank you so much." Guy wanted to say a lot to that, but once again a thought occurred to him. The thought being that he knew what his voice sounded like, and he knew he did not sound like a girl. Nor could he fake a proper girl voice if his attempts at doing so earlier were any indication. So he didn't say anything. He merely smiled. He took a quick look around, and when he deduced that all the other pirates had been apprehended, he turned around, jumped back in his car, and drove away. "Huh," the cop that had been consoling him hummed, straightening her hat as she watched SheZow speed away. "Guess this one doesn't talk." The man glanced at her in confusion. "This one? There's more than one SheZow?" he asked. "Not at a time," she stated. "But just look at her. The costume is different. She's shorter. She's younger. And it doesn't look like she's fully used to this yet. I wondered what was going on when SheZow went missing. I was pretty sure I knew what it meant." The cop closed her eyes for a second, and then smiled. "But judging by her work here, I think we're in good hands." Guy's tires screeched as he parked his ride in the middle of the lair. Kelly turned away from where she was seated at Sheila's panel to stare at him as he hopped out of the car, and then tackled him in a hug. The force in which she shot into his arms would have knocked him back if he didn't have super strength. Even so, he did sway back a bit in surprise at the impact. "What? I'm still mad at you!" she snapped, voice muffled from being buried in his neck and hair. Guy considered pushing her away and starting another fight. She was mad? But he didn't bother. He was tired, and though he would never admit it, he needed a hug. "Ditto," he grunted, wrapping his arms around her as well. He wasn't a lot taller than her, maybe just a few inches, but in those shoes he could almost rest his chin on her head. Instead, he kneeled down so he could rest his head on her shoulder as well. "So," Sheila said. The twins broke away from each other to face the supercomputer. She was smiling faintly at them. "How did that feel, Guy?" she asked. Guy didn't answer right away. He glanced at Kelly, who, as promised, still looked mad, but was mostly just worried. She seemed resigned to it. Like she wasn't going to help Sheila force him anymore, but she'd respect it if he chose to keep going. And so the decision was entirely his. "Yeah," he said with a large sigh. "Okay, you want a SheZow? Here's your SheZow. Happy?" "Very," Sheila replied. Her smile widened, and Guy couldn't help it. He smiled back. "All right," Kelly said. "Are you ready to change back?" "Yeah," Guy told her. There was a flash of white light as the SheZow S symbol spun around him in a circle, and his superhero getup was replaced with his usual attire. Guy broke into a huge grin as he smoothed his hands over his hoodie and admired his baggy pant legs. "How do you know those were the activation words?" Kelly asked him, eyes wide. "I don't know," Guy admitted. "I just guessed." Kelly gave a pleasantly surprised grin. "Wow, you're gonna make a great SheZow." Guy observed her crossed arms and slightly teasing stance. He gave a strained chuckle. "She-rific."